Great. Okay, good. So I just want to welcome everybody. We are delighted to have Kalpesh Krishna talking to us about birding in India. And just to give you a little bit more about Kalpesh, he's a PhD student in computer science at UMass Amherst. He's doing research on text generation technology like ChatGPT, but no questions about ChatGPT until the very end. We'll do bird questions first. He started birding during the summer months of the pandemic and was quickly obsessed with it. Most of his birding in the last 3 years has been in Massachusetts, but also in India and Washington State, with a few trips to California, Ireland, Dominican Republic, and the UAE. He's building his life list, currently at 781, and photographs every bird that he sees. His favorite birds keep changing, but currently they are Bohemian waxwings and Indian skimmers, which hopefully we'll get to see. Besides birding, Kalpesh serves on the Hampshire Bird Club board, as many of you know, and enjoys stargazing, playing badminton, hiking, and watching soccer. And very occasionally, these activities get a higher priority than birding. But in my experience, Kalpesh is a pretty dedicated birder, and we are delighted to have him talk to us about birding in India. Kalpesh, before you get started, I'm going to have Monique talk about how we'll do questions and answers.
Good evening, everyone. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat. And then what we'll do is when I see the questions, we'll have time for questions during the presentation or at the end. When I see the question, I'll call on you and you can unmute and ask your question. All right, that's all I have.
Okay, so I'll share my screen, and if everything looks good, we can get started. Okay, so can people see my screen? And is it is a full screen covered with the presentation? Okay, fantastic, great. Okay, yeah, so thanks so much, Leslie, for the introduction, and Monique for organizing the questionnaire. And I'm delighted to be here, talk about birding in India, and share some of my adventures birding there. Most of the photos in this talk have been taken by me, but I'll mention whenever the photo wasn't clicked by me. And like Leslie mentioned, Indian skimmers are my current favorite birds. So I thought I'll start with a photo of the Indian skimmers on the very first slide. So before I actually get into the material, let me tell you a bit of background. I was born and brought up in India and spent the first 21 years of my life there, mostly in these two cities, Pune and Mumbai, which is in the western part of the country. I'll get more into the exact geography of these places later. As a teenager, I did what most people do. Played cricket, soccer, video games, worked hard in classes. Bird watching was never really a thing in India, and I had no idea that this hobby even exists. I really like computers though, and this prompted me to come to UMass for my PhD studies in 2018. And yeah, and I'm still a grad student at UMass Amherst, pursuing my PhD in computer science. But my family was still in India, so I tried to keep going back every 6 to 8 months. And yeah, they were pretty much the similar visits, played some more cricket and soccer. Things changed a lot in 2020 as it changed for a lot of us. All this travel stopped thanks to the COVID pandemic. And like everyone else, I was pretty much stuck at home, and I didn't like it. I started birding during this time. It was quite random. I just looked outside my window, bored of research one day, and I saw this blue jay, which reminded me of a software that I used as a kid. And very soon I bought a binocular and I started this week-long quest of trying to photograph a blue jay. And yeah, I didn't have a camera at that time, so this photograph is my first photograph of a blue jay. It's through the binoculars in August 2020. And soon, this birding thing became a very big obsession. I upgraded my binoculars with a zoom lens and a proper DSLR camera. I joined eBird. I started maintaining a life list and upgrading my quest each time I got a new bird, chasing a new bird. In the process, I also got my first rare bird check email from Larry, which some of you all may have gotten for this late Eastern kingbird photo that I got in October. And I also started chasing rare bird reports on eBird, met some great people along the way. The red crossbill you see on the top right is one of my first trips with the UMass Bird Club, and the barnacle goose you see here is where I met Steve and Leslie. So it was a great experience. And finally, in December 2020, the pandemic calmed down slightly and flights between India and USA resumed. And I made my first trip back to India as a birder. And I was both pretty nervous and excited for this. I was wondering whether I would see birds in huge metropolis cities like Mumbai or Pune. I wondered whether birding would be accessible, whether I would be able to do it as freely as I could do it in Western Massachusetts. And I also wondered whether I would meet a community of active birders there, like Western Mass is great, but do so many people do birding in India? So over the last 2.5 years, I've made over 4 trips to India. And one of them was fairly long. It was the entire summer of 2021 because of a summer internship. And all I can say, it's been a really fantastic experience. I've had nearly 100 checklists in India by now and seen about 326 species. And I think this is just scratching the surface of what India has to offer, as I'll try to present in the next few slides. I'd like to call India Incredible India, the motto that we use to advertise tourism in India. And I hope I can try to share some of this with you in the rest of this presentation. So this talk will mainly have 2 parts. In the first part, I will give you an overview of India and the kind of birds you can see in India. I'll start by describing the geography and climate conditions in India, which make it a really good place for birding. And then I'll tell you, using some quantitative statistics about the kind of birds and the diversity that you see in India. The second part of the talk will focus more on my own adventures. So I have 4 locations listed here, which is a pretty representative subset of the places I've been to, but there are a few more. In case there's not enough time, I'll probably drop one of these places, but I hope I can cover all of them. And finally, I'll share some concluding remarks. I'll give you some tips for visiting in case you are interested. Share what I'm excited about next, and finally give a conclusion about what India is all about in my final slide. So let's get started with the first part of the talk. So let's start with a quick poll. Perhaps, I guess you can just call out or use the raise hand feature, or just unmute yourself and let me know if any of these questions apply to you. So has anyone been to India? And the second, has anyone birded in India? Anyone should feel free to respond if these apply to you.
No, you can say yes.
I've been.
Okay, that's great to hear. So one person, and did you bird as well? Like, did you go to any specific location?
I was not birding then.
Okay. I see. Right. Just like my childhood, yeah.
But you saw a lot of parrots, right?
Yeah. I mean, birds are just even if you're not a birder, you will definitely have some bird encountered in your visit to India because there are just so many birds. Okay, so if no one, so that's great. I mean, I guess a lot of you will have not really seen India, and yeah, I guess I hope there are a lot of interesting things in this presentation that you can take home. Okay, so let's get started about the location of India. So India is located in the southern part of Asia, as shown in the map here. And it is just above the equator, which makes a lot of the country a tropical country. You can see I hope you can see my mouse pointer, but you can see the Tropic of Cancer is passing through the middle and the equator is below it. So half of India is tropical, and then the northern half is just above the tropics. And India is centrally located between 3 biospherical regions, Africa, Europe, and the Indo-Malayan region, which is Southeast Asia. And this has actually proven to be quite good for birds, because if you look at the kind of birds in India, you will see overlaps from all these 3 regions. And this includes migrants as well, which come from North Asia and Europe. In terms of the geography and climate of India, the first thing to note is that India is fairly compact. It is the 7th largest country in the world, but it's still just 1/3 of the total area of United States. And like I mentioned, half of this area lies between the tropics. Despite having this pretty limited area, India is actually packed with geographical and climate features. So if you start from the very top, you can see in brown, I've highlighted the Himalaya mountains here. And these mountains rise up to 30,000 feet. They contain all the top 5 to 10 tallest mountains in the world. And they have dense evergreen forests at the lower elevations, which are among the richest bird regions in India. And this is really cool because then you have this altitude diversity where you don't just have birds in the plain and metropolis cities, but also like these really high altitude species. If you go a bit lower, in green, you can see the Indo-Gangetic plains are highlighted. And these are where all the big rivers flow, such as the river Ganga and Yamuna. And it's really good for crops, due to which it's become one of the most population dense areas of the world. So moving on a bit, on the west side of India, we actually have a desert, which is quite unlike any other part of India. And this is marked in yellow here, called the Thar Desert. This area has become pretty famous for, desert activities and sightseeing because of the presence of cities like Jaipur and Jaisalmer. But it also contains some of the most famous birds of India, such as the Great Indian Bustard, which is unfortunately currently critically endangered. Moving on, most of India lies in this area called the Central Plateau. And this is one big plateau covering lots of different habitats, such as grasslands, forests, rivers, lakes. India also has a pretty wide coastline, as shown in blue here. And this includes several very famous beaches, such as the regions of Goa and Mumbai, as well as the famous Malabar region, which is basically Kerala, if you've heard about some places in India. Now, while India lies in the tropics, its climate is usually pretty hot, except for 4 months of the year, which is June to September. And in June to September, this really interesting thing happens where a lot of thunderstorms come in from the Indian Ocean and it just rains. It rains a lot. Like some places just get over, like I forgot the exact numbers, but it's probably like a kilometer length of height of rain, and it just rains every day. And this can lead to like pretty dramatic changes of scenery. So these are two photos from places near Pune in the Western Ghats. And typically in the winter, it looks like the photo on the left. It's pretty barren yellow grass. But as soon as these rains hit in June to July, you can see that it becomes lush green, waterfalls, dense forests, and so on. Now, you may be wondering, why am I telling you all this? And isn't this a talk about birds? So it is still a talk about birds. And I promise most of the following slides will be bird photos. But what I want to just tell you is that this is a recipe for a wildlife hotspot. So being in the tropics, being centrally located, having this altitude diversity from Himalayas to the coast, a great variation in habitat and climate, and all of this packed into a relatively small area, such as compared to much bigger countries, makes India really, really good for birding. Specifically, if you look at the birds in India by the numbers, there are almost 1,370 species that are recorded within India itself. And this number can go up to 1,500 or more if you include some neighboring areas such as Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and so on. Many of these birds are year-long residents. That means they do not leave India at any point during the year. They're just found either in the same location or they move from one part of India to another. And many of these birds can only be found in India, which are also known as endemic species. If you look at just India, this number is about 83. And including other countries in the subcontinent, this can go up to 160 endemic species. Unfortunately, about 200 of these species are globally threatened, though many of them have stable localized populations in India. And India is one of the best places to see many of these 212 species. 13 of these species are critically endangered, but about half of these 13 are either extinct or expatriated. And the photo here shows a red-headed vulture, which is the only critically endangered species that I have seen in India. We were very lucky to see this bird in December when I visited Jim Corbett National Park, and it was flying around with a flock of other vultures. Now, while most of birds in India are resident, there's also a component of migration which takes place in the winter months. And there are about 300 winter migrants who enter India during the winter months. These species typically come from the north or the northwest of the country. So regions like Northern Asia, which includes Mongolia or Siberia, or from places in Europe. And both these species you see here, the steppe eagle and the blue throat, are winter migrants that I got in December. They've traveled from Mongolia and Europe respectively. An interesting aspect of migration in India is the altitude migration. So birds which are typically found in higher altitudes, such as the Himalayas in the summer, they come down to the plateau or plains during the winter. For instance, the verditer flycatcher shown in this photo is a bird which you'll typically find in the Himalayas in the month of April or May. But in December, you can see it in Maharashtra next to Mumbai or Pune. And now every place is unique, and I've birded a lot in America or the New World, and I really like it. But if you want to make some specific comparisons between India and the New World or the Americas, let's talk about some families which are found way more frequently in India. And this is quite fascinating, because if you combine all the area of the Americas, it's almost 12 times the size of India. But despite this area disadvantage, you can see many of these species just in India. So for instance, if you look at eagles and vultures, India has more than 1/3 of the worldwide species of eagles, nearly 24 species out of 68 species. In USA, you can just see two species natively, the bald eagle and the golden eagle. And if you look at the New World more broadly, including South America, you can see just about 11 species of eagles. But in India, you can see 24 of them. The same is true for vultures. India has about 9 vulture species out of 23 in the world, while USA has just 3, and the New World in total has just 7 species. A similar story is true for larks, pipits, and wagtails. Larks and pipits are not exactly in the same family, but they're often confused with each other, so I've combined them in this bullet point. If you combine these three families, in India, you can see almost 43 different species of larks, pipits, and wagtails. And while USA just has 1 species of lark, the horned lark, as well as 3 species of pipits, which you can see in different parts. And the New World more broadly has just 12 species. Another interesting species that you'll see a wide diversity of in India is shrikes. So India has 12 out of the global 34 species of shrikes, while in USA, you can just see the loggerhead shrike and the northern shrike reliably. This is also true for the New World. As far as I know, shrikes are not found in South America at all. Finally, moving on to pheasants, and this photo here shows another very famous bird of India, the Indian peafowl or the peacock, which you can see. I think you can see this in Florida too, which it's been introduced or it's escaped in Florida. But India has about 32 to 46 different species of pheasants and grouses, depending on how you do the count and what you include, while the New World has only 12 native species. And this is and to be fair, a lot of these species have been introduced as game birds in the New World. But if you want to see them natively, India is a really good place to see these pheasants. And there are many families which are not found in the New World at all. To give you a few examples, sandgrouses, these are these cream-colored birds which camouflage really well in grasslands. Bulbuls, which I think you can see some introduced versions in USA, but they're native to Asia and Africa and Southeast Asia. They are these really pretty passerine birds with these mohawks, as you can see this beautiful Himalayan bulbul here. Hornbills, such as the great hornbill shown in this photo. These are a bit similar. They may remind you a bit of toucans from Central America and I think South America too. But the difference in hornbills is that they have this horn on top of the bill, which you can see in this photo. And finally, sunbirds, which is the sister family to hummingbirds in in the New World. And there are tons of other families. Here are just a few examples. There are barbets, bee-eaters, bustards, white-eyes, which you can only see natively in the Old World. So yeah, that's a quick overview of birding in India. I'll just pause for a couple of questions if people have any, and then I'll move on to my own adventures. Okay, I see a couple of things on the chat.
Nothing new on the chat. If anyone has
Okay.
questions, they can ask.
Okay, I'll just keep moving then. Maybe we can keep questions or discussion for the end. Okay, so I'll move on to the next part of the talk, where I'll try to give you some examples of these birds and discuss my own personal adventures birding in India. So my personal adventures in India have spanned over 4 visits, as I mentioned before. And this is what my eBird map of India looks like. To be fair, it's just scratching the surface. I've not visited the eastern part of India at all. For birding, I've not visited Kashmir and the northern parts. And I've seen about 1/4 of the species that India has to regularly offer. But if you compare it with the relief map I showed earlier, most of my birding has focused in the red region, which is the Central Plateau, which is where I'm also from. And I made a couple of other visits to other parts, predominantly North America in the foothills of the Himalayas, which I will talk about after I discuss the Central Plateau. Birding has become pretty much a family activity for us now, ever since I got into birding and I started visiting India after the pandemic. Almost all my photos have been with my dad, who is pictured on the left here. And this is after we saw the Indian skimmers in Dholpur. You can see we all have big cameras and binoculars now. And at times my sister and mom also join in. This is all 4 of us in the heart of the pandemic enjoying a boat ride at Bhigwan. I'll talk a lot about Bhigwan very soon. Now, all of us are working, and we cannot really bird in these exotic locations every day as much as we would like to. So a lot of our birding has actually focused on, has been inside the big metropolis cities that you may have heard about, like Mumbai and Pune. So I'll first describe the fun of birding in metropolis cities itself, and then move on to some more exotic and bird-rich destinations. So I'll start with one of the most famous Indian metropolises, which is Mumbai. And Mumbai is home to 21.3 million people. And this is about 2.5 times the population of New York City, which is the largest city in the United States. And it's a fantastic city for many reasons. I mean, there are monuments, there's culture, there are tons of things to do in Mumbai. But one thing you may be wondering is that with so many people all in one area, like, can birds really coexist? And you may not, like, if you Google Mumbai, you may not really find anything much about birding in Mumbai, because it's not, like I said, it's not a very popular hobby in India. But if you explore a bit and you look deeper into, if you look deeper into eBird, you can find that it's really fascinating. It's actually a birding paradise. So here's a photo from the heart of Mumbai, which I took in 2020. It's a photo from the creeks of Navi Mumbai. It's a photo of probably 5,000 lesser flamingos coming for their evening feeding. And this was really fascinating to see. Like, when we got there, the creek was completely empty. And within minutes, like, these 5,000 flamingos, all pretty large birds, like probably as large, probably about half a size of a pelican. They all came in and then filled this creek, and like there were like these 1,000 pink spots in a matter of minutes. And the reason flamingos like to come here is that there's a lot of algae in these creeks, and they like to dip their long necks into the water and then feed that. And they try to visit every evening apparently to get a bite of them. And it's not just flamingos. Mumbai actually has a lot of interesting species. Nearly 300 species have been recorded. In my own adventures, I have seen these really large flocks of other birds too. The photo on the left shows hundreds of shorebirds. like not in the picture, but that's what the scene had. This is a more zoomed in shot to show you details. So these birds are Pacific golden plovers, and in the background there's some little stints and also some curlew sandpipers. And on the right, this is at the same location. You can see lesser whistling ducks, another bird which is pretty abundant in Mumbai. And one really amazing thing is that these photos were taken from Dharavi, which is one of the most human population dense regions of the world. So clearly these birds have found some way to coexist with so many people. And yeah, it's really fascinating to me to get such sites in the heart of a metropolis like Mumbai. Now, Mumbai is great, but I'm not birded too much there since most of my childhood was actually in another metropolis, which is Pune. And Pune is about 3 hours east of Mumbai. It's not as famous, but it's also a pretty big city. It's home to 7.5 million people, which is about 2 times the size of the population in Los Angeles. And yeah, you can see it's a big metropolis in this relief map. And the green arrow is where I live, like right in the heart of the city. And yeah, despite so many people and so many buildings, it's actually been pretty fantastic doing backyard birding from my home. It's amazing year round, and we have seen over 90 species from our home over my 4 visits. So on a typical day, it's pretty usual to wake up in the morning due to the very loud sound of parakeets and mynas, such as this rose ring parakeet shown in this photo. There are a lot of trees next to my house, and they like to come onto the trees and eat the seeds from them. Sometimes they are accompanied by these really beautiful Indian gray hornbills. I'd shown a hornbill earlier. This is the more resident, the less exotic hornbill that you see in India, but fascinating nonetheless. And they have a really nice call, which immediately lets you know that a hornbill is around. If you look up into the sky instead of the trees, it's very common in India to see black kites flying all around. And usually raptors are a very unusual sight in backyard birding, and I think birding in general. But in fact, black kites are the most common bird in Pune. It is likely the very first bird you will see if you visit Pune and look up in the skies, because they're just black kites flying all over the place. Besides these larger birds, there are also some really beautiful smaller songbirds, such as the spot-breasted fantail that I photographed here. Now, while there are a lot of these common birds, our backyard keeps getting its share of rarities too. So last winter, we had this very unusual influx of chestnut-tailed starlings, a bird which has had less than 100 sightings in our county prior to 2023. And yeah, it was quite fascinating to see this bird like every day and see how it interacts with the other starling species, which are more common. We also sometimes get these really large wetland birds fly over a house, such as an Asian woolly neck stork. The photo isn't great, but yeah, it's like a quick shot just to document it. We've also had a black crowned night heron fly over a house, and that was pretty cool because this is like this bird you can see literally everywhere, including Western Massachusetts. Finally, while I'm away, my dad has continued to do backyard birding, and he's found some really nice flycatcher birds. The photo on the top shows a brown-breasted flycatcher, and the photo at the bottom shows an Indian paradise flycatcher. Both of these are like fairly rare to see within the city, and yeah, like there's this big element of mystery of what you will find inside the city, and it keeps amazing me. Okay, so I'll move on. So yeah, so backyard birding is definitely great, but I think we should now move a bit away from the metropolis to see what else can you get in India. And if you move to the outskirts of Pune, it's actually fantastic for birding. This is a screenshot of the eBird hotspots next to Pune. And because Pune is located at the edge of the central plateau, which I'd shown earlier, it has this nice contrast of dense mountains on one side, on the left side here, dense forested mountains on one side, whereas drier scrub grasslands on the right side. And due to this wide variety of habitats, you can see a number of like red, orange hotspots all around Pune. I can go on and on about each of these locations, which I really love. But there's one place that really blows my mind and gets everyone talking. And that is the Bhigwan Bird Sanctuary, which is about which is about 60 miles east of Pune. It takes about 2 hours to get through the traffic and reach there. And it's primarily a fisherman, like a fisherman's village, also a pretty big farming village, quite famous for its fried fish. But this place is actually also a wetland, which has been created by the backwaters of a dam built in the 1900s, the Ojani Dam. And this wetland has made it a big migrant trap. And not just migrants, a lot of resident wetland birds have also come and accumulated in this area. And the surrounding forest attracts a lot of birds, like such as the mottled wood owl seen in this right photo. I made 4 visits to Bhigwan, and each of them have been really amazing. It's a very popular destination for birders among Pune, and like it's like an annual pilgrimage for several people I know. There are 2 ways to explore Bhigwan. The first is via a fisherman's boat, which is shown on the left. My sister and I are trying to like find bird species with another fisherman's boat in the top picture. And sometimes you get treated to like really spectacular views, such as the photo on the right of the skyline and the sunset. Naturally, since you're in a boat in the wetland, you get to see a lot of fantastic wetland birds. And the boats get really close to the birds, so you can like get really good looks and appreciate the different details of the bird. This photo here shows a greater flamingo trying to compete for food in this really packed region of birds. There are a lot of brown-headed gulls at the bottom. Also some northern shovelers in the foreground, which are not that visible, but yeah. And yeah, these flamingos are really popular in Bhigwan. A lot of people come to Bhigwan just to see huge flocks of greater flamingos. Besides flamingos, there are a lot of other really great wetland birds, such as the painted storks, the Eurasian spoonbill, which is the cousin of the roseate spoonbills in USA. Also some nice shorebirds, little ring plovers, and fantastic gull populations, such as the Palas's gull and the brown-headed gulls. And each of these species have very high number of individuals. But one of these species just goes, it just goes crazy in numbers. And that is the starling, or the rosy starling. It just gets out of control. And this phenomenon, also known as murmuration, can involve almost 100,000 rosy starlings. And it is one of the things that you can witness in a boat ride in Bhigwan. These photos show one of the most glorious starling murmurations I have seen. And it's against the backdrop of the setting sun, which makes it all the more spectacular. I think there were about 40,000 birds in this murmuration, and they continue to dance in the sky for about 20 minutes before settling down on these trees. Since we were on a boat, we then approached these trees and got really close to these birds to get nice look at details in the backdrop of the setting sun. And yeah, this was quite mind-blowing. Like, my sister and mom are not really birders, but yeah, even they were quite amazed by this sight. Now, moving on, besides boating, you can also explore Bhigwan via car. And this often involves off-roading, such as the picture shown in the bottom left. These car drives are often through the farmlands and grasslands of Bhigwan. And since you're sitting in a car and you're not walking, it's a very nice way to get close to birds because they don't get scared of you. Now, one of our visits to Bhigwan was an exclusive car / off-roading experience. And it was quite memorable. We started our day early in the morning, trying to target all the game birds or the quail species that you can see in Bhigwan. And this is quite challenging because quails can be very secretive, and finding them can involve a lot of patience. So it took about 2 hours to find all of Bhigwan's specialities, which are these 5 francolin and quail species. We got great looks at all of them, thanks to the fact that we were inside a car and they didn't really notice our presence. And we also got to hear many of their mating calls as just painted francolin in the second photo. An interesting thing is that some of these birds are very hard to see outside the monsoon season, which I described earlier, from June to September, because they're very secretive and they don't really come out in the open. It is during the monsoon season when they are looking for a mate and looking to breed. And that's when they really come out, and you can see them calling and and yeah, enjoying. So having seen the quails, we then turned our attention to a really large tern colony on the grasslands. This colony had about 500 nesting terns. And there are 3 species of terns in this photo, mostly river terns, shown by the yellow bill in the photo. But there are also some whiskered terns and little terns mixed into them. Some of these terns are like widely found in different parts of the old world. And this was really cool because we could see the nice size contrast between the different tern species. I also got one lifer here, which was a little tern. And like this photo and many of the previous photos, the sheer number of individuals everywhere, bird individuals everywhere, just continues to amaze me about India. In the afternoon, we moved to more raptor kind of hunting, not hunting, sorry, raptor finding. And we targeted the raptors of the grasslands of Bhigwan, such as Bonelli's eagle on the left and the white-tailed buzzard on the right. One interesting thing about the left photo is that there's a pretty big bulge inside, like on the throat of the Bonelli's eagle. And that's because we believe the Bonelli eagle just had a really big meal. And it came to sit down on this small mountain rock. And like there were a lot of birders that day for some reason. So there were like 6 cars all around this mountain, all photographing the Bonelli's eagle, and it was like sitting there like a king. Quite an amazing sight. And finally, we ended our that day with a quick night safari. We did a 1-hour search to find this nightjar species, the Indian nightjar. Yeah, it was quite difficult to find this because they're a bit unpredictable and you don't know where they will be. Luckily, as we were about to exit, we found one just in front of our car. And yeah, I don't know whether it was injured or it was just resting. But yeah, if somebody's an expert on nightjars, I would love to hear later about what this bird may be doing. But yeah, it was not moving at all. So yeah, I suspect it may be injured or something. So yeah, Bhigwan was great, and yeah, it's one of my favorite places to bird in India. Besides Bhigwan, I've also spent some time visiting North India. This was primarily in the month of December 2022, where we did this 8-day trip covering large parts of North America and visiting 4 to 5 famous wildlife sanctuaries. One of them is the famous Jim Corbett National Park, which if you're a wildlife person, even slightly interested in India, this is the first thing that you may hear about. Jim Corbett is a bit higher in India. It's a more of a North Indian destination. It's in the foothills of the Himalayas in the dense evergreen forests, about 1,300 to 4,000 feet in altitude. And it attracts tons of tourists every year, primarily because of Royal Bengal tiger sightings, they have about 300 individuals of tigers here, and that really attracts a lot of non-birders as well. Unfortunately, it's not really a good place to see tigers because like at least in our 2 attempts, we didn't see a tiger. And a lot of other people have also said this online because there's very thick vegetation in Jim Corbett, which makes it easy for the tigers to hide. And I've heard that if you want to reliably see a tiger in Jim Corbett, you need to make at least 10 attempts doing a safari inside the park. But what people don't tell you is that it's actually very good for birding. And it's recorded almost 500 different bird species because it's like right at the boundary of the Himalayas as well as like the plateau and the lower altitude places. Now, to explore the park, there are pretty strict rules. The only way to access the park is via these government-organized safari services, which are open-air jeep-like vehicles shown on the left. And there are very strict rules that you cannot leave these safaris when you're in the park. Like you cannot walk as a pedestrian in any part of the park because there's a big risk of tigers. And you also have a number of signboards, such as the one on the right, telling you that this is banned, and you can get a big fine if you do that. So this makes birding a bit restricted, but like the drivers are quite cooperative and they stop at good spots if they sense that you also like birding. And we had a pretty good safari in Jim Corbett. We didn't really see the tiger, but there were tons of other birds to see. There's been this growing theme in this presentation that raptors are great in India, and Jim Corbett was no exception. We saw this magnificent steppe eagle sitting on bare trees, just waiting, just posing for us to take a photo. And there were lots of other colorful passerines, such as the lineated barbet on the right. But the safaris were a bit short and we were a bit unsatisfied and we wanted to do a lot more birding. So we decided to explore the park a bit in the outskirts, where we could actually walk on foot without any restrictions. And that was really rewarding. So we got to see some really secretive owls, such as a brown fish owl, a really colorful forest passerine called the white-crested laughing thrush. And it's got a really funny and almost creepy song, which is why it gets the name laughing thrush. The same location also had the brown dipper, which is one of the 4 international cousins of the amazing bird you see in Western USA called the American dipper. And dippers are the only songbirds which can also swim. So yeah, I love dippers. And finally, we saw one of the most sought after birds in Jim Corbett, the ibisbill, which is photographed here. Ibisbills are shorebirds, and they are the only species in their family. They're quite unique because their bill is like an ibis, but they are much smaller and they have other features of a shorebird. And these birds come down from the higher altitudes. They are altitude migrants. They come down from the higher Himalayas down into the rocks of Jim Corbett in the river to like feed. So all this was great and we were really enjoying our birding here. And that's when we had a really frightening moment. So we were walking on these trails and we see fresh Royal Bengal tiger footprints. And this was like just 1 to 2 hours old. So these tigers had just walked before us. And there's a big difference when you're actually walking instead of being in a protected vehicle safari. Yeah, we were really frightened to see this. I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate. We did not see the actual tigers, but yeah, as soon as we saw these footprints, we immediately requested our vehicle to like come down to that spot, pick us up, and like be as safe as possible. So yeah, I will visit these areas again to see a tiger. But yeah, so far only footprints. And after Corbett, we continued our journey in North India, moved a bit more south, visiting the Bharatpur National Park. And this is located more in the plains, in the central plateau region. It's a wetland at the border of Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh, really close to the Taj Mahal, one of India's most famous monuments. And it's a man-made sanctuary. So it was originally like a trap to attract ducks for hunting purposes almost 200 years ago. And because of it's become a pretty famous spot for like ducks, wetlands, eagles. It also was really famous about 20 years back for hosting the Siberian cranes in winter, which is a critically endangered species. And they haven't visited since 2002, and now the only reliable place to see them is in central China. But yeah, this is how Bharatpur really got famous for birding. Several articles online say that Bharatpur is the #1 birding destination in India. And it's really unique because if you want to explore Bharatpur, the only way to do it is via these cycle rickshaws. You cannot drive in Bharatpur because it's not allowed. You sit in these 2-person rickshaws which are operated manually by a rickshaw driver, and they're really nice for birding because you can like sit, pause, and like use the different parts of the rickshaw as a pivot for your camera. And the cycle rickshaw drivers are actually very good at birding. They know all the 350 species that you can see in Bharatpur and typically act as birding guides as well during your visits. And needless to say, birding was great here too. We got great looks at oriental darters, which are the cousins of anhingas in Florida. Lots of nice reed warblers, which are like really large warblers as big as American robins. And they like to hang around reed beds and like call really loudly. Lots of eagles, more raptors such as the imperial eagle. And some other nice heron lifers such as the striated heron eating this really tiny fish in this photo. And we ended this day with a total of 105 species, which I think is my best checklist so far. Yeah, we also got to witness this really nice sunset on the left. And we were lucky to see two Sarus cranes. These are different from the Siberian cranes. They're more common, but they look quite similar. These two lovely Sarus cranes just arrived as the sun was setting in the backdrop of the sun, photographed here. Okay, so I think I have about, okay, I'll spend the next 5 minutes finishing up the talk. I have about 3 slides more, and then I can take questions. So yeah, with that, I will talk about some tips for visiting India. They are mostly related to accessibility and things you may be wondering about. So the first thing I want to mention is about the eBird hotspots. I'll say that most eBird is a pretty reliable source of locations and where you want to go for birding. But yeah, it's best to like stick to these hotspots and not venture too much outside them. Also, it's good to use your common sense and not do anything anything unusual. Yeah, I can discuss this more later, but it's always good to check with locals. So locals really know these hotspots, and there's a growing eBird community in India. We have 37,000 eBirders. We rank number 3 in the world after USA and Canada. Many of these eBirders are part of local tour agencies who are really, really good. We went for a North India trip with a local tour agency, and they're also very welcoming to foreign tourists. In fact, most of their clients are foreign tourists. One thing to mention is that it's better not to drive yourself in India. Driving in India is very different, besides the obvious thing that it's left-handed drive rather than right-handed drive. And it's always best to hire a driver because of these differences. It's pretty easy to be able to do this. And finally, it's important not to miss the non-birding stuff. Like all these locations have fantastic non-birding things such as good food, culture, monuments, and history. So moving on, you may be wondering what's next for me. So I'm actually heading to India in a couple of days, not for birding, for a visa renewal, but why not also do birding? So I'm actually going to visit this place called Chopta, which is a much higher altitude birding. It's about 4,000 to 6,000 feet in the Himalayas. And I hope to see some birds such as the one on the right, the Himalayan monal and the rufous-breasted accentor, among many others. And with that, yeah, I'll come to the end of the talk. I will just quickly summarize what I've described. So yeah, India is great for birding, primarily because one, you have a really unique geography and climate, which makes it a wildlife hotspot. It has many different species, including year-round residents, larger birds, and endemics. It has a very high quantity of birds, not just diversity. And you can see this high quantity of birds wherever you go. There's a big element of mystery because there are not as many eBirders as USA, so hotspots are not as well documented, and you can really be surprised by some of the birds you find in some locations. And finally, there's a lot of non-birding stuff. I described this in detail, but yeah, this is something that's pretty. Some of this is pretty unique to India, and it's really worth visiting. So yeah, I hope I've not put you to sleep like these spotted owlets, but I thank you for your attention and happy to take any questions you may have.
Excellent. I don't see any questions in the chat, but we're open for questions you might have.
Thanks, Amy, for the comment. Yeah, good to know.
This is Janice. I have a question.
Okay.
So, Kalpesh, I got 3 weeks to go to India. Tell me
Yeah.
the 2 places I need to go birding.
That's tough. Okay, so yeah, I definitely recommend. Oops, sorry. Wait.
Extra slides, we like extra slides.
Okay, so I definitely recommend Corbett and Bigwan. Like they're pretty much just like they're pretty famous for good reasons. And sorry, no, not Big One. Wait.
What about your father's yard?
Sorry, yeah, I recommend North India. I recommend Jim Corbett National Park, and I recommend Bharatpur a lot. Primarily because like you will not only see birds but also see a lot of other cultural things. North India is a lot richer in culture and history than the southern parts of India. And for birding, it's really fantastic. Like they're like the prime hotspots in India. Um, I also recommend this place next to Jim Corbett National Park called Sattal. So this is like a slightly higher altitude and not too far from Jim Corbett, about 2 hours drive. You can get way more, like very different species compared to Corbett there. And yeah, like I think if you do these 3 places over a 2-week trip, you can probably add maybe 300 species to your life list, which is 250 to 300 species to your life list, assuming your guide is pretty good. So
Okay. Thanks.
Kalpesh, Catherine Conway has a question for you.
okay.
Catherine?
Let's pull
Oh,
up this.
hi. Yeah, this is Kathy and Miles Conway. And Miles actually was the one who said he had been in India a number of years ago before he was a birder. But he had the question about how easy is it to get around India on public transportation?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll say within a city, it's very easy. In fact, it's way easier than cities in USA. There are a lot of ways to get around, such as auto rickshaws and taxis, which are very prevalent and make it really easy to get around. And India is pretty well connected with trains. They take long to like get through places, but yeah, they're a popular mode of transport in India. And of course, flight connectivity is good. But if you want to visit many of these birding hotspots, I wouldn't rely on public transportation because they're just fairly remote. And while they are connected by train services, it'll just take much longer. And I think it's best to hire a car and a taxi and then take that around India.
Okay, thank you.
Kalpesh, Sophia Wong has a question for you. Sophia?
Awesome. Yeah. A great question about English. So English is actually one of the 2 official languages of India. The reason for that is due to the British rule for 300 years, due to which a lot of people in India learn to speak English. And all school children in India are taught English. That being said, I found that in rural India, English is less prevalent, and it is more about like it's mostly the local languages spoken there. So usually like the birding guides, if you go with a famous tour agency, they give you guides who are pretty good at English, and they also know the local languages, so they can like help you with that. But within the metropolis, you'll find a very large fraction of English speakers, mainly because of it being one of the 2 languages. Also, southern India has more English speakers than northern India. Because besides English, they just speak their local language, which is not that widely used. So then they also learn English during school.
All right. Donna Lee has a question. Donna Lee?
Right. So about time of year for visiting. So winter is supposed to be the best time of visiting because you have those 300 extra migrants. But I'm actually pleasantly surprised by how good it's in the summer as well. So like the 3 months I was in India in Pune, that was off migration. It was during the monsoon seasons when you get that heavy rain, which I showed on this slide. And this was actually fascinating. So I learned that there are a lot of species you can see best in these months, such as cuckoos and estrelided finches and also quails, because they like to call a lot during these monsoon months, and it makes it much easier to find these species. Also, I think India is prettier in the monsoons, but a bit less accessible because of the heavy rain. But yeah, winter is great, and I think for species counts, probably winter is a better is probably a better month to visit. So winter being from November to March, because the migrants, they come into India around October and they stay in India for 2 to 3 months, and then they start leaving in the end of Feb or March. But yeah, there are only 300 migrants. 1,000 birds are residents, so you can see them any time of the year.
All right, any other questions? I think that's it, Kalpesh.
Good, great. Thank you so much, Kalpesh. This was a wonderful presentation.
Yes.
Yeah, so happy to
We're all
give it.
making our plans.
We need a HBC trip there.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, an HPC trip would be great.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Yeah. Oh, I think there's one more question about from Donnelly about the tour and friends. So yeah, I suggest going with tour agencies, or I mean, if you have like I suggest going with someone who is from India or has lived a significant part of their life in India, simply due to logistic and accessibility reasons. But yeah, it doesn't have to be a tour agency. If there's just someone who's a birder who knows about India, I think that's okay. It's just that it makes a lot of things easier than trying to figure out everything yourself. So yeah, so I think that's about it. Yeah. Okay, cool. No more questions.